Good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to our session. My name is Sediko Rakolote. I am the founder and the trustee of the Progressive Socio-Economic Investment Institute. It's a trust established for public benefit activities. One of those activities that we're doing is related to education and raising awareness. In the area of education and raising awareness, we host various webinars on various topics, ranging from politics, health, you can name it. Today, our focus will be on qualitative research methodology. And one will ask, why should a foundation or a trust like us focus on research? Various studies have shown that research is what propels humanity forward. It fuels curiosity. And when we get curious, we ask questions. And when we ask questions, we improve our learning. And with research, you participate in discussion informed by facts, not just common sense. In discussions where there is no facts, sometimes we just raise opinions that sometimes are not assisting in propelling our society forward. Today, colleagues, we are fortunate to have a person who has been in the space of conducting research for many years. He's an associate professor at Northwest University. He has worked in various universities, including University of South Africa. That's where I met him. And I want to declare that at some stage, he was my supervisor. His name is Dr. Barry Hanyane. Without a waste of time, Prof, I'll hand it over to you to start the discussion. Colleagues, before Prof starts, let me just indicate that this is going to be a very interactive session. He's not just going to be presenting alone, he will present and from there we'll take questions. And sometimes he'll pose questions to us so that we can respond. It's a learning session, a very interactive session. Over to you, Prof.
Dr. Rakolote, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon to all. I'm looking forward to an interactive session. It might be comprehensive. I will wait for the principal himself, Mr. Rakolote, to indicate whether I should stop talking and we can proceed from there. But yes, I anticipate a very interactive session. Please take notes for questions. I think the best way is to record those questions on the question column so that we can entertain this towards the end of our session. I will try to be very practical in my engagement. I see I need to be able to share the screen. So Ntate Kolote, if you could help us there to enable the sharing of the screen. Okay.
Prof, I've made you a co-host, then you can share.
Yeah, this is it. Okay, I take it everybody can now have access. I'll try to, we go to view, or should I leave it at this? No, I want to take this column out so that it occupies the space quite well. See, slideshow. Okay, let's say from the beginning. No, this is big. Let's go back. Okay, let me work from here, if I may. Okay, put it aside a little bit. Right, let me work from here. Folks, the less daunting task is, of course, to try and demystify what qualitative research is all about. And from my understanding and where I'm seated, and given all the years that I've spent in academia trying to engage in this topic and in this very exciting area of research, is that very often we tend not to apply our understanding of the immediate surrounding and the world in which we live in. I want you to picture yourself walking at any popular museum, either in Gauteng or wherever you are, in whatever particular province that you find yourselves. But of course, let me make reference quickly and hypothetically, taking a trip down the Apartheid Museum somewhere in Mondio, I think it is Mondio, but it's in Johannesburg, where you are taken down memory lane, the period during the apartheid years. If you can't find yourself there, you simply visit the Hector Peterson Museum in Orlando. Once again, taken down memory years where state of emergency was imposed, and all other experiences you can relate to the 70s, the 80s in particular, and then of course, the founding of our democracy somewhere in post-1994. So it is those lived experiences that we want to understand as a source of information, as a source of knowledge, and somewhere in between that, we are intrigued with the responsibility of trying to make sense through some form of interpretation of that kind of reality as well as experiences. So outside of that pedantry, rudimentary explanation, let me share my notes with you so that we can contextualize this discussion from my notes. We will discuss with Untitled Rakolote as to whether these notes can be made available. I don't have a problem with that. To you guys for further interaction, and of course, hopefully we'll open the side window for discussions and interactions going forward. I'm wary of the fact that some of you guys are doing your master's degree, you're doing your PhDs, and perhaps some of you guys have taken a somewhat mixed method approach to your various research protocols. So today we will have to try and assist you understand that part that deals with qualitative research methodology. So what are we going to focus on? One, we're going to deal with the nuances and intricacies that are related to the social science research. I'd like us to start there so that we lay a foundation and we're able to position this kind of research methodology within the broader spectrum of the research methods that we find in both the humanities as well as the social sciences. Secondly, we have to unpack the qualitative research methodology by focusing on the focus of the method itself, the meaning, characteristics, strategies, or designs, right? Challenges, as well as possible solutions to some of the challenges that are related to this kind of knowledge creation. Dr. Rakolote, I take it you are in charge of this webinar. You have muted everyone else, part of the ground rules. And of course, people are encouraged to take notes. And I would further encourage participants to post questions so that we can attend to these questions at a later stage. So what is this animal called the qualitative research methodology? I want us to, as I said, not to focus on what a lot of authors have written. I can quote some of the important source of literature the books written by El Babi, Johan Moton, whom I have a pleasure to have been supervised by Professor Paul, who before me, Johan Moton was a student. And at a later stage, we shared the same platform at SANPED, where he was appointed as one of the tutors who would come and engage us on the very same subject that I'm engaging you. Authors such as Cresswell are some of the authors that have influenced my thinking and the way in which I understand the subject matter. Sarantakos, perhaps Rakolote at a later stage, we can discuss disposing of a list of sources that participants here might find useful today as well as the years to come. I'm not prescribing anything, but I'm a believer in the fact that the best way to understand research is not only by reading books, but by practicing research. Some of us have had the pleasure of spending about nine months consecutively in the field, collecting data, analyzing data, and understanding the importance of the application of data. So what is the basis of qualitative research methodology? Surely in every state, every country, there is an authority. For some of us who are students of public administration, we simply point towards an existing government structure, an existing government system, an existing government process. And in turn, we want to understand what is the fundamental relationship between government on the one hand and those who are governed. It may be people, it may be citizens, it may be residents. But somewhere between that relationship is the opinions, perceptions of those that occupy that space. And from time to time, we are drawn into wanting to understand traditions that guide such relationships, their ongoing debates. I take it some of you guys will be excited to understand why the former president, Mr. Jacob Zuma, decides to take a particular political stance in relation to a number of issues, but the most prominent one is the refusal to actually present himself before the State Capture Commission. So this will capture the imagination and the public debate around such a behavior. And in a sense, everyone else will have an opinion about what is developing as things stand. Then, of course, we have accidental observation, right? Born out of incidences that may occur on the basis of them to be unpredicted, something that suddenly occurs. And one should not look no further than the current global pandemic, COVID-19. Suddenly we are sprung into action from the health fraternity, trying to understand what is the root cause. Those who work in that space will tell us we need to understand the genome of the virus that causes COVID-19. And then, of course, we'll have to develop some body of knowledge. And here we are now. We are using words like sanitation. We are using words like isolation. Like we've never used these words. Some of them are nouns as applied in terms of our behavior like never before. So all of these begin then to influence nothing else but research. And please, let's look at research as a process that is sophisticated, that is complex, and should not necessarily be equated to processes such as investigating, such as probing. More often than not, you find a person saying, I was researching my family roots. that may very well be deemed as probing, that may be deemed as an investigation. As I said earlier on, research is complex. It requires some form of the application of sophisticated tools and, of course, an analysis that complements such processes. So let's begin then our foundation as we discuss. What is this thing called research? Far removed from the day-to-day activities of probing, far removed from the activity of investigating. As human beings, we more often than not have what I would refer to as a blind date with knowledge. Knowledge is out there. There's a huge ecosystem of knowledge waiting to be discovered. But in order to do that, we need to apply scientific methods, scientific tools of gathering this knowledge and dissect it, and by and large, apply such knowledge to provide solutions to the multitudes of human problems that we experience. Research always produces new knowledge. I mean, take the instance of COVID-19. From time to time, we hear universities like Wits, universities like KZN, universities like Oxford being in the forefront of trying to unravel, discover what is behind the spread and transmission of COVID-19. If it's a virus, what is the behavior of the virus? What is the genome of the virus? Is it mutating? What is the difference between the first strain and currently the second strain? Can we understand the composition of the virus itself? How is the protein enclave of the virus made up of, so that we can understand how to defeat this virus? Research always reflects critically on the topic. Please underline that word, critically. We're going to talk about this as one of the strategies that are used in qualitative research. So in essence, we cannot take things in front of us. When I say things, I refer to experiences at face value. We need to ask questions. Why is there femicide in South Africa? Why is there a sudden emergence of violence against women and children? What could be the root cause of this second pandemic, if you want to call it that way, in our country today? We need to contribute to policy formulation and implementation. Those of you who are attached to government structures and departments, you'll agree with me, without conducting research, be it desktop, be it a policy survey, be it a comparison of policies from different countries, from different spheres of government, all of this persuade us, forces us to conduct some form of research. Why do we do this? To inform political debate. This week alone, I take it those who were given a chance to respond to the SONA as part of the post-SONA debate needed to go out there to understand some of the intricacies, the challenges as highlighted in the SONA delivery itself, so that in turn, they are able to contribute meaningfully to the debate that is going on. Enhance and improve program and project management. Surely the body of knowledge around PMBOK, project management knowledge, cannot be static. It needs to be developed. We need to come up with new systems, new solutions to new problems that crop up from time to time. So research is a process, okay? It's not a once-off thing. There are certain steps that must be taken that complement one another in an orderly, logical format, in which scientific methods are harnessed in order to discover and increase knowledge. I'm being biased here towards the discipline of public administration where I'm attached to, with a view of informing policymaking, policy execution, as well as day-to-day decision-making. I'm wary of the fact that some of you guys as participants are likely to come from different disciplines. It could include disciplines that are biased towards quantitative, but you might have an interest to understand how qualitative research methodology operates. It's a systematic search for answers for problems faced by public managers. It's a never-ending exercise. It must be carried out continuously. That's the reason why you have agencies and institutions such as your Human and Science Research Council and other related agencies, including NGOs in the space where the public service, public sector exists and operates. Consider at least 2 questions. Here I've included 3. What time does methodology class, for instance, starts on a Wednesday, if the focus is on attending a research methodology class? Does the MPA degree, for instance, affect the promotion of students in the public sector? Or both of these questions, as it were. And especially for those of you guys who, as I said earlier, are doing your masters, your MPAs, your PhDs as well. These are some of the questions that you need to deal with. Practical, day-to-day questions that you can think of. So as we define what research is, one then needs to summarize and say, research is a systematic gathering of data to answer a question. Now, to those of you who are still struggling with your research proposal, you have submitted it, it came back. Second submission, it came back. Third submission, it came back. You are even deciding to retire from your studies. Take note. A research proposal must have a problem statement. From a problem statement, we then create room for a central research question. If your problem statement is more than 2 pages, something is wrong. Some of us who are supervising postgraduate students, who are examining theses and dissertations, the unwritten rule is that at least a page, if not half a page, must tell us exactly what is the research question in your research protocol. What exactly are you intending to research? The minute you go to page 2, page 3, I can bet you something is wrong with your research design. And what normally happens is that either the supervisor or the examiner will have a problem with that particular research protocol, and it will be sent back to you. So a research will contain a theoretical framework. I always remind honors, masters, and PhD students, if you forgot all those theories that you were exposed to from first year, second year to third year, then we have a problem. There's no way in which a research protocol would not be positioned or find expression in a chosen, deliberately chosen theoretical framework. We have so many theories out there. Most popular, your systems theory, propounded and promoted by David D. Easton, the theory of bureaucracy, Max Weber. Then, of course, from theories, you also have paradigms. The new public management paradigm, the now rejected process approach paradigm. And then, of course, you have the newly founded neo-governance from governance paradigm. You have to read around these sources of reference and try and position yourself, position your work somewhere in some of these theories. Marxism, it's a theory. There's nothing wrong in using a Marxist theoretical framework to understand power relations, It could be from a racial point of view. It could be amongst countries. It could be wanting to understand the societal problem, especially relations between the haves and the have-nots. You can use Marxist as a theoretical framework. And I know Untitled Rakolote would feel comfortable to approach any study from that perspective. So research is objective. It also increases the sum of human knowledge. So our understanding is that without research, the issue of human development would be impossible to achieve. What is not research? Information collection alone is not research. Okay? I've said this before. You might be probing. That is not research. You might be investigating something alone. That is not research. There's a difference between personal knowledge and general knowledge. Okay? Opinions that are personal in nature, as well as a much broader opinion shared by a number of people. For instance, the belief that you have what we call radical economic transformation could very well be positioned as nothing short of general knowledge. But personally, people have their own ideologies, their own principles. Some go to church, some don't go to church. All of these perceptions influence the building up of knowledge. However, that is not research. There's a difference between information and knowledge. Information is raw, okay? Some even go further and say there's a difference between data and information. And somewhere in the end, a body of knowledge made up of assumptions, made up of references, made up of a connection to a particular theoretical input. That is knowledge. Research seeks not only to solve a problem, but also to explain, describe, explain, predict. Once again, let's go back, COVID-19. We've got to describe what causes COVID-19. We've got to explain how best to mitigate any chance or chances of contracting the virus which causes the disease. But at the same time, we have to predict, are we likely to enter into strain 3 and strain 4, stage 3 and stage 4 of the disease? This is what science helps us to do as mankind. So naturally, those of you who find themselves in the social sciences, and perhaps by extension and default, humanities as well, consider the world as a cosmos, as an environment where there's huge differences in terms of ideology, in terms of beliefs, in terms of practices, in terms of rituals. People differ, not only in terms of skin color, but in terms of behavior, which in turn is influenced by a whole range of instruments, be it religion, right? You have Christians, you have Muslims, you have Hindus, and other religions. And this creates nothing else but diversity, which makes the world of research very exciting and very interesting. So in the social sciences, there are branches of science which deals with issues of institutions and the functioning of human society, with the interpersonal relationship of individuals as well as members of society, and perhaps somewhere in between that, government, represented in all spheres, national, provincial, or regional, as well as the local government sphere. In public administration as a discipline, social research deals with the political and governance aspects of human society. I've said this in the beginning, I will not repeat myself in this instance. One of the steps in social science is to identify a particular problem, and that problem must qualify to be researched from a scientific point of view. It's very interesting when honor students in the beginning of the year are supposed to submit their research protocols. And the possibility of such submissions carrying topics that are not necessarily researchable is always there. Secondly, to borrow problems from one discipline to the other without acknowledging the multidisciplinary characteristics embedded in a particular problem. So what am I trying to say? Research problems are usually associated with a particular focus and locus of a given discipline. It's not always the case that you can take a law problem and take it to the Department of Sociology and want to persuade them that here lies a research protocol. You will have a problem with such a situation. Problem identification, you need to be crisp. You need to be focused on your problem. What is your problem? You can't afford to be ambiguous. You can't afford to generalize. Formulating a research problem is very important. You have to do it. It must be your problem. More often than not, some of the postgraduate students will come to me and say, I don't have a topic. I'm struggling to get a topic. It's very simple. You go to your library. When I say your library, I mean your institution of intent, where you want to receive your degree. Have a relationship with a subject librarian. Speak to this person. I intend to register for a master's degree, a PhD, or an honors degree. I don't have a research problem. Can you please provide me with at least past theses or dissertations in public administration? I am interested in the area of service delivery. So service delivery is a key word. Government is a key word. Local government is a key word. Service delivery protests, perhaps, could be included in that basket of keywords. It's easier for the subject librarian to organize those sources for you. As you receive these manuscripts, the first thing you do is to go to each last chapter where researchers have proposed further areas for research. And this is where you guys come in and continue with the conversation, continue carrying the baton of focusing on a particular problem in order to give a much broader view in relation to possible solutions. Acquiring knowledge on current theories. Folks, it's important that before you can even compile your research protocol or proposal, spend 80% of your time in the library, organizing your literature, reading, and the remaining 20%, write your proposal. I'm going to repeat myself again. 80% of the time must be spent acquiring sources, organizing your sources, reading, engaging your sources. Some of the poor manuscripts that we receive hardly make reference to what I call critical voices. There are people out there who specialize in focusing on particular research areas, on service delivery, on policy evaluation, on monitoring and evaluation, and all other paradigms and specific areas of interest in the discipline of your choice. Make sure you have a list of those critical voices and read their work in return. Identifying and labeling variables. Could there be variables? Could there be a dependent and an independent variable? Just to make a quick example, does oxygen support combustion? Okay. And I'm bringing here a quantitative problem. one problem that can be resolved in a laboratory. But then one can also bring a qualitative problem. Does substance abuse contribute to the increase of crime in a particular geopolitical space? So here lies two variables: substance dependency and crime. Which one is independent? Which one is dependent? And from a hypothetical point of view, if that is your topic, it simply suggests that crime is dependent on the presence of substance abuse. So you've got to problematize your protocols and understand what exactly are you intending to investigate. Define concepts, okay? And take note, there's a difference between words, terms, concepts, phenomenon. So this difference, or differences as it were, must be taken into consideration each time you start writing. A concept only exists in our mind. It's an abstract tool. African Renaissance, it's an abstract tool that seeks to stimulate our thinking, that for once we can talk about African unity. But you can't touch it. You can't feel it. Right? Applying the human senses, that is. So anything that you can touch and feel, we refer to that as a phenomenon. Something that you can see with the naked eye is a phenomenon. Developing and formulating hypotheses, I think we've touched on that as a matter of reference. Very important that you understand from the onset what will be your research design. So as part of your notes, I would encourage you guys to put up a triangle for me. At the bottom of your triangle, it's a problem statement. Bottom right corner, research aims / questions. Bottom left, methodology. I'm going to repeat myself. Draw a triangle. At the top, you have a problem statement. Bottom right, research aims / questions. Bottom left, it's methodology. If your research proposal or manuscript that is due to be submitted for examination does not connect these three areas very well, then you must know you have a problem. And of course, the supervisor, let alone your examiner, will highlight that problem. And in the end, some of us, when we get manuscripts for marking, we look at your research design. Once we are satisfied with your so-called foundation or plan, we go to your results or findings chapter. It needs to speak to your research design. Then we know that this research was done carefully and properly. What are the kinds of particular research protocols that you're likely to take? You can conduct a survey. You can conduct an experiment. Does oxygen support combustion? And this you can only do in the laboratory. Or you can focus on a case study. And we're going to talk about this as we move forward in relation to qualitative research. Or you can do a life history, once again, qualitative research. Or conduct what we call problem evaluation. People like Rakolote, this is their area. They want to find out, are certain policies working for this country? Are certain policies benefiting particular beneficiaries? Okay? We've got to establish this from the beginning. What is the format of your research? What timelines are you setting? What targets are you setting? What kind of a research is this? Is this qualitative, or is it quantitative, or is it mixed method? This must be decided from the beginning. description of samples and sampling procedure. What is the population size of your subjects? If you're going to interview managers in a municipality, there could be about 40 or 30 managers in a municipality. At least we expect you to interview about 10% of that, which is roughly somewhere around 10 managers. Okay? That becomes your sample, taken from a bigger population. Because you are alone. We can't expect you to talk to everybody. You don't have resources nor the time to do so. So you need to give us at least 10% of your population. So in the end, research design will then deal with secondary data analysis, resource mapping, systematic social observation, interviews. More so when it comes to qualitative methodology, you are likely to conduct ethnography. We will deal with this as we go forward. A lot of you guys are likely to investigate organizations, be it community, be it government organizations. But some of you are interested in human behavior, and you would want to understand why certain people behave the way they do. And one can take a very social experience of creating a passage for young girls to womanhood. If you go to Venda, you talk about Uchina Domba, and the vendors will have their own rituals to say, this is how we want our girls to be carried through the passage to womanhood. Okay? And they will be taken to a river where they do the snake dance as part of the rituals and observe other rituals as well. But the minute you go to Swaziland and you want to understand the creation, the establishment, the conveniences associated with passage of womanhood from girls to women, there's the reed dance. Same purpose, but different rituals. Okay? So for those of you who do social psychology or sociology for that matter, would be intrigued by such experiences. And then you go to KZN. Similar, more or less similar rituals are being performed. These would then become some form of a case study where in the process you try to weigh the pros and cons, differences and similarities of more or less a same ritual. But there are sub-rituals that must be observed. Furthermore, we say research is driven by evidence. If you cannot provide evidence, and in a scientific way, then I'm afraid you are not conducting research. Research is the actual data collection through construction of research instruments. You've got to know these instruments. Is it a questionnaire? If so, what kind of a questionnaire is this? The questions embedded in the questionnaire, are they open questions or are they closed questions? Usually open questions are there to solicit responses that are based on perception and a certain degree of subjectivity, whereas closed questions are more objective in character. And some of these objective questions may very well deal with issues of numbers. And this is where quantitative research comes in very conveniently. Actual data gathering, are you going to have interviews? Are you going to have focus groups? And deliberately so. So please, make sure that you understand how these instruments, not methodologies, but instruments of data gathering are used. And then in the end, there's the third phase of data analysis. I'm not a comfortable quantitative researcher. I'm still a student there. However, some of my publications are quantitatively biased. So the question is then asked, who assists me? Thank goodness, Northwest University Porch campus, we have a statistics department. I simply go there, speak to Dr. Sophia Ellis as a statistician. Please assist me on my questionnaire. This section is a quantitative focused section. How do I ask questions? Can we code my questions so that when I come back from the field, it is easy to analyze those questions? So a program must be used. And the most popular program from a quantitative point of view is your statistical package for the social sciences. And these are programs that are updated from time to time. It's important to use the latest update. Interpretation of results. Usually, Dr. Surya Alice will send me frequency tables, and immediately I receive them because I can't understand these numbers. They're so complex. I would send an email and say, can you please convert these tables into graphs so I can provide narration to these graphs, so I can provide a description, an analysis that the reader will make sense of my results, which will then become findings, and I will make conclusions, and in turn, I will make recommendations. All these components you find in a past research report for honors, dissertation for masters, and a thesis for PhD. And it's important we read these sources so that we can replicate and more or less follow the same procedure. So let us now explain what is qualitative research methodology. The main characteristics here is that qualitative research methodology from an epistemological point of view, it's embedded in a particular strategy or design called phenomenology. Okay? I'll explain this later in detail. It's very important that we understand the purpose of a qualitative research method. And as we do so, we appreciate the fact that qualitative research methodology in its nature is inductive. What do we mean by this? Simply put, it's a method that is dependent largely on how the next person or persons make sense of the world in which we all find ourselves in. We focus on meaning, we focus on interpretation. So in a sense, we are interested in how other people think. It's inductive. How other people solve their problems. Okay? So what do? We simply put up a research protocol to understand the behavior of counselors from their own world, not from the world of researchers. Why do councillors fight in the municipal legislature? By default or extension, why do parliamentarians fight? Japan, Uganda, South Africa, we've seen squabbles in parliament. What causes this behavior? Should we classify this behavior as unacceptable? If so, what informs that? What traditions inform that? What is this thing called SONA? What is this thing called, is it SOPA, State of the Province Address? What informs these governance traditions? We're interested in that. But it's not our interpretation that we are concerned about. It's the interpretation of those who we see as participants that we want to talk to, interview, and understand the world according to their interpretation. So you can make a whole range of examples. The world where rituals of traditional origin cultural doctors, to call them? What does it mean to visit them? What does it mean to be told there will be problems coming? How do we avert them? As we consult these people, we want to understand the world according to their interpretation. Research design is flexible. It's not fixed. It can't be fixed since it is largely dependent on what other people are saying, on how other people view the world. So it needs to be flexible and accommodate other perceptions and interpretations. Data sources are varied, and we're going to talk about this as we go forward. The unit of analysis, please underline this word. A lot of students get feedback from some of us, and we point to what we call a unit of analysis. So don't be confused. A unit of analysis is the same as the object of study. What exactly are you studying? Is it a program? Is it people? Is it systems? Is it structures? Is it relationships? You need to be clear. What is a unit of analysis? It must be holistic. And sometimes, as I said earlier, it concentrates on relationships between elements and sometimes between people. It can be through a mechanism such as policy. Okay? I'm reminded here of chapter 2 of the Constitution. Cooperative governance. So here I've posted two pictures. On my right side of the screen, it's a community in Ghana that has adopted a white person. If you look at the picture, what comes to your mind? They are wearing traditional garb or attire, and one can simply associate with traditions and cultures of West Africa, predominantly Ghana. But on the other hand, you have a white person selling the word of God, the Bible, to what is commonly known as a primitive tribe. What sense can we make? How do we interpret these pictures? And I'm going to talk about this as we go forward. So the first design that we should talk about is called ethnographic studies. This is a strategy that we use, or it's a design that we use, depending on how you use these terms, the language. We use this in qualitative research. It's called ethnographic study. From the word ethnic comes the wording ethnographic studies. It is interested in people's cultures. So those of you who do sociology will find ethnographic study as one of the popular strategies to apply in conducting research. It describes the different cultures and further understands human species. So human species are that unit of analysis. And we're interested in the coexistence of this species. We're interested in rituals, in how they behave. An ethnographer assumes that different meanings are attached to different phenomena. Religion has its subsets. Muslim, Christianity, Hindu, Buddhism, and others. Okay? Uses participant observation and becomes active participant in culture. Imagine having to go and conduct a research on how religious rituals as performed by the Shembe Church vis-a-vis the Hanyane Church. What are the differences? What are the nuances? What can we learn from how these two groups make sense of divine power and the use thereof by extension? Extensive field notes are primary source of data. So observation is a primary source of data. And this is complemented by your existing body of literature through a form of sources, be it articles, be it theses, be it dissertations. Second is grounded theory, which seeks to develop theory by systematically gathering and analyzing data. Okay? But to sum it all, when you apply grounded theory, you start your research without reference to a particular theoretical framework, but you end up producing your own theoretical framework. Now, this is the preserve of geniuses out there. And debate within academic circles informs us that the period of creating knowledge is gone. We have now entered a period where we apply knowledge. That's why today we talk about the fourth industrial revolution. It's more solution-driven rather than creating knowledge based on certain assumptions. Thirdly, you have case studies. I have a feeling the majority of you guys will find comfort in this strategy. This is where, and remember, I've made an example earlier on of creating a passage for girls to womanhood, right? Venda, Swaziland, KZN. What are the differences? What are the common characteristics? So my notes, reference, this is a detailed contextual, right? Either geopolitical or cultural. And I've used the passage to women as a point of reference of a limited number of events or conditions and their relationships. The Venda culture, how does it link with the Swazi culture? And in turn, how does it link with the Zulu culture in relation to a common area of investigation? Focus on contemporary phenomenon within some real life context. To this day, the passage of girls created to womanhood still exists. Use documents, artifacts, interviews, observations. It's a combination. Some might call it triangulation of data collection as sources of evidence. Explain causal links. Okay? I've made an example earlier on. Does oxygen support combustion? Does the prevalence of drug abuse result in an increase in criminal activities? That's causal. In real life situations that are sometimes complex for experimental underlying oxygen supports combustion or survey strategies. How many youths are affected by drug abuse and in turn are exposed to criminal activity? Fourthly, you have what we call phenomenological studies. Now, some of you would not enter this space, but for those of you who are in public administration and are interested in the use of this strategy, one of my former colleagues at UNISA, Dr. Thani, Thani, her PhD thesis argued that this strategy can be used in the discipline of public administration. So in a sense, public administration is currently suffering from research bankruptcy of not using the extensive research tools that are available either from the social sciences or from the humanities. And one of them is phenomenology. So what is this strategy all about? It says to us, the researcher cannot impose his or her worldview. Instead, it is important that he has a relationship with his or her subjects and allow them to provide meaning in relation to the way they view the world and make sense of it. So in a sense, the researcher cannot walk in and say, people in Limpopo behave like this because of the environment. No. The researcher must give access and room to the people of Limpopo to tell him or her. I'm going to make a wild example, saying that the audience here is majority Africans. Hogaba in the morning. What stimulates that? What does it mean if it's a ritual? And the researcher cannot interpret that. But the researcher must allow the people who practice the ritual to tell him or her what is the significance, what is the meaning of that. Okay. And you can talk about a whole range of meanings. For instance, there's this ritual amongst Africans, amongst us, to mourn, right? If you're a widow, 6 to 12 months, you must put on that regalia, the black regalia, that says, I'm a widow. To understand that world of mourning extended, as a researcher, I can't impose myself. I need to have a conversation with widows, and I must give them a lot of space to tell me, do they feel comfortable wearing that dress? Are they respected each time they go out for services, queuing at the bank, queuing at the taxi rank? Do they relate well with such an experience, or do they find themselves somewhat belittled? And this is the interpretation that must come from the subjects themselves. Biography. I think a lot of you guys have read the book, A Long Walk to Freedom, which then tells us that biographies are used in qualitative research method as a way of detailing someone else's experience. In the case of Long Walk to Freedom, Professor Fatima Meer is the author who focused on the experience of the late Dr. Nelson Mandela, his upbringing, his incarceration, post-incarceration. What was life like? So that from that experience, as ordinary citizens, we can begin to make sense of how apartheid affected the life of the former president. So a lot of you might not necessarily go into this area. And this is where some of you guys will write your research proposals and claim, I'm going to use biography. Hold on. Studying a policy and biography doesn't meet, doesn't coincide. It doesn't relate. It doesn't relate. And this is how we then begin to assess your research protocols and proposals. Then, of course, my favorite, critical theory. And in this instance, one will be excused to associate it with feminism. And feminism is not about gender inequality per se. We can use feminism to understand how the apartheid system functions. Because the apartheid system was about prejudice. It was about limiting other people's chances of exposure to certain benefits. You go to Durban Beach, you want to take a swim, there's a sign that says, no black people allowed. No access is given. So one can use feminism in this instance to understand power relations between two different forces or two different groups or individuals. It's based on race, it's based on culture, it's based on gender as well. Okay? So, but it's broader than race and gender. It also focuses on opportunities. So what are the principles of qualitative data gathering? It is naturalistic. It deals with issues that are presented within a particular context. I think my examples speak to that context. The context where women are given a passage, girls are given a passage to men who, women who. As an example, that is a context in which you find yourself in. Some of you guys
especially in public administration, are interested in issues of service delivery. Service delivery is the context. The next question, what about service delivery? Some will be interested in service delivery protests. Some will be interested in how there is no systems or tools to fast-track service delivery. And you want to find out. Somewhere in between, your findings tell us it's because people who don't have the right requisite skills and knowledge are appointed. But how do you arrive at that? It can't be presumptuous. You must demonstrate a path that says, this was the problem. These are the tools that I used. This is the context of the literature that informs me, but in relation to empirical research that I conducted, I interviewed these people. This is what I've received. And in the end, my data analysis points to the following findings. It's a process. It deals with real life situations. And of course, it applies techniques that are unobtrusive, e.g. interviews, as well as observations. Okay. A good researcher must have two things. One, a diary. Two, a journal to make notes. Qualitative data gathering focuses on the role of the researcher. Unfortunately, as opposed to quantitative, in qualitative, there is room for subjectivity, but such room, such analysis must be within controlled parameters. Sampling in qualitative research, we use non-probability and purposive sampling. Okay? Both. But you are allowed to choose one as you deal with your research protocol. I would encourage you to read more here, because a lot of you guys are exposed to misinterpretation of your sampling techniques. Smaller sample size. I've made a good example earlier on. 40 municipal managers. You don't interview all 40. You take 10. Use your own discretion, informed by science. This is snowballing or random sampling. You don't have to attach certain variables of qualification. The choice is yours. The researcher makes decisions. Issues of credibility and trustworthiness, very important. I spoke about this concept, triangulation. Observation, what you observe, does it speak to what you were told in the interviews? You need to speak to that. Is the tool supported by literature? The third component, you need to speak to that. That is what triangulation is all about. Very often, as researchers, we don't remember what we said as quoted as a source by other researchers. I always tell people, if I find a manuscript that does not make cross-referencing, I have difficulty. Chapter 1 of the manuscript must tell us what to expect in the chapters to come. Those chapters must remind us of your research aims and objectives. So there must be cross-referencing. It mustn't give the impression that you wrote chapter 1 and 2 in 2019, chapter 3 and 4 in 2020, and chapter 5 and 6 in 2021. It must be a holistic manuscript. This leads us to what we call crystallization. Your thoughts, your inputs by others, especially critical voices, must be one argument. In the end, we will do what we call constructing meaning or making sense of the world, of research, obviously. So what are the characteristics of qualitative research methodology? It is founded or based more on structured observation, okay? What you see, and it must come closer to the principles of truthfulness. It is systematic. I spoke about this earlier on. Types of gathering techniques, is it structured or systematic? Does it involve participation, observation? You pretend you are part of the group, but you are not. You are a researcher taking notes. Or an observer in a social setting. You go to any mall, you sit there and pretend you are just a passerby. Or you enter into a transaction in some of the stores and pretend you are a customer. Simple observation, counting cars. It's another example. Or contrived observation. Introduce computers to group of rural school children is one particular example. Guidelines for observation, there must be a clear focus of what is it that you're observing. Okay? Who are you observing? What are you recording in your observation? Recording must be easy to operate. Okay? Are you taking notes, or are you going to use a voice recorder as an instrument to do so? What are you observing? Incidents, specific short periods of time. You want to understand commuters in a taxi rank, how do they behave? It's peak hours, short period of time. Continuous observation over a long period. Are you understanding behavior in a long distance trip? Right? Do people get to demand eating, get to demand other forms of conveniences? These are kinds of observations that must be observed. But there are challenges in qualitative, right? At times there are technical problems. The tendency to generally generate lots of bits of data without making sense. I'm always impressed by journalists in the field where they're supposed to go in and make notes. They use what we call shorthand. It's only the writer who will understand the notes. And what do? They use keywords. There's no time to capture everything. And sometimes, unfortunately, people are misrepresented by those notes. And then you hear somebody say, I did not say that. The journalist captured my narration incorrectly. Observation is less structured. It emphasizes on the interviewee's point of view, not your point of view, but those that you study. However, at times, especially in a focus group, people can argue amongst themselves. And it's important as a researcher to let them argue, because this gives you a chance to dig into nuances that you never thought existed, and it enriches your data. Flexible and response to direction set by the interviewee. So the interviewee is the boss and not the researcher, not the interviewer. Okay, I'll skip some for the sake of time. Researcher will have less control over proceedings than one-on-one interviews. It's a given. Okay? Focus groups are difficult to organize. Some people would come, some people would not. And at times, you'll be forced to have 2 or more focus groups to accommodate those who can't make it in the first round of your data collection. Recording and transcribing is time-consuming. Make time for the process of recording, but most importantly, transcribing. You must do it as a researcher. Your supervisor will not be there to assist you. You must do it. So what are the recommendations? Have a clear and a comprehensive way of introducing your research. Devise questions to elicit maximum responses, more so open-ended questions, to get as much feedback as possible. And guess what? Use language that is acceptable to participants. Okay, that makes sense. If you're conducting research, I've had a pleasure to go and interview people as far as Doornkop in Middelburg. You know, Doornkop is famous for being the first area in South Africa to be given back to communities by government. But unfortunately, there was no, at that time, proper sanitation system. And I was intrigued by this. And I started the research project, and I went there. I could not interview the respondents in English. I needed to switch a little bit of Ndebele, a little bit of Sepedi, a little bit of Isiswati. These are dynamics that as a researcher, you need to be aware of and equip yourself. Otherwise, you're going to lose a lot of information, a lot of data that otherwise would enrich your study. So to sum it up, research is a thought process. It's scientific investigation and a study to establish facts and reach new conclusions. And qualitative research is that train, that vehicle that can enable you to reach new conclusions. It is designed to expand boundaries of current knowledge. So it's important for you to read what others have produced so that you can design your own space. Investigate a problem, a concern, or a question. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Prof. Hanyane. Very informative. And I hope colleagues were taking some notes. We can give you some minutes to a minute to drink water, and or switch on your aircon, because I can see now you're on fire. and if we were in another platform, we're going to say, go deeper, Papa. Fire, go deeper. Now you're on fire. Colleagues, now it's time to engage on the presentation or submissions by Prof. Hanyane. What we're going to do is that please raise up your hand and pose some questions or make comments. And Prof. Hanyane will take some notes, and we'll take a round of 3 questions. Then he will respond, and take another round of 3 questions. Then he will respond. So over to you, participants. Feel free to raise your hand so that we can identify you so that you can raise questions. But while you are still thinking of the questions, there was a person who requested that Prof. Hanyane please repeat the triangle explanation. Somebody requested that you
Okay, good stuff. Good stuff. Let me write them down. Let's take 3 at a time, and then I will respond to them.
We'll go also to Ntate Mpotsedu. You can shoot Ntate Mpotsedu.
Thanks a lot, Ntate Rakolote, and greetings to Prof. Hanyane. And indeed, it's not even a mouthful. It's more than that. But we appreciate indeed the platforms where knowledge will be shared. I've got a couple of questions, perhaps, and comments. I guess I'm just used to asking questions all the time, so you bear with me, Prof. But one of the first things which I would just want you to talk to, and perhaps it is a bit generic, is how has data gathering, whether it be for both qualitative or quantitative or both, a mixture, adapted to this era that we are in, the COVID era, and this generally, as we know that there would be, your well-developed methods of data gathering, which may not necessarily speak to the realities that we're living in. That's just something that came to mind as you were presenting. But firstly, if one can go to slide 3.1 of your presentation, you have emphasized that research always produces new knowledge, and it informs political debate. I'm one of those people who have argued that it appears as though that new knowledge, whereas it is supposed to be produced, is somehow stifled by the developed scholastic models which have been used over time. For instance, I've had interactions with students or scholars who would want to argue, and one may say it is pedestrian and not academic or scholastic, but who would want to argue, why can't I own my new knowledge as an individual? Why shouldn't I be allowed to present new knowledge to Prof. Hanyane in my thesis or in my submission, which would be, credited to me, maybe because, yes, indeed, I am bringing this knowledge out for the first time. And I mean, I very much like the fact that in your exercises, perhaps you may have interacted with a lot of rural communities in the past, So if I were to go Gangwash Kukwan,
or Matzeko, the famous place.
Exactly, yes, exactly. Or Mbalula Zingizing,
Zingizing, that's it.
Yes, and get that information which only some grannies would possess. And perhaps develop it, or package it in such a form that it can be attributed to both the primary sources and myself. So how do we deal with that? You have raised the question of some poor manuscripts which you saying you receive. I agree with you. In fact, I've seen not just manuscripts, I've seen dissertations that have made it to PhD and master's levels that are of very, very poor quality. And I must be honest, to some extent, I thought there was a lot of racism in how some of these things were assessed, because I asked myself, how can this Afrikaner scholars, so-called scholars, if I may call them, pass through with such low quality products, which somehow you ask yourself, how did they even go through, turn it in? So I agree with you on that one. And perhaps the last point, Prof, the use of biography in research, which is something that you have raised. I want to add also the use of selected newspaper articles. We have seen how much people rely on Google in doing research, and you punch do there, and my articles can just appear where I just woke up in the middle of the night and I was like, you know what, I really don't like Donald Trump. And just coin a 1,200 article word, which makes it to the SABC or online or News 24, and for all you know, that becomes a source without really, taking it through the basic critiques, which we would.
Can I link it with Wikipedia?
Yeah, oh yes, at least that one you have decided as that without we will not take that. Untitled Rakolote, let me stop there. I'm a broadcaster. I used to get paid for speaking.
You'll come back in that. Let's give other chances, please.
Not a problem. Not a problem.
We'll go to Mepoli Bushielo.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think this was very, very informative, and good evening to the participants.
Good evening, dear.
I'm interested more in how we create a new knowledge, because let me take where some of us are working. I once worked in the as a speaker, where you find that what is done there, for sure you are observing it also in Parliament, and looking at the Constitution and the rules that guide them, they're not, incongruent with each other, including the work of the oversight. Now you are seeing it in Zondo Commission, where even Judge Zondo will ask, where was the oversight? What is the work of the oversight? Were they not able to pick this issue up? But then, in terms of the committees, they depend on the loyalty of the party, because remember, in terms of the Constitution, you don't go to Parliament as an individual. Only political party can be represented there. So whatever you articulate the position of the party. And sometimes maybe, and you have seen it happening many times, it is in conflict with your conscience. You have seen others saying vote with your conscience, but you are not actually elected by conscience. You are elected and represent a political party. You see, I have seen that problem. And I think the Constitution does not explain it. I have attended some course, I think it's VET tried it, and some African speakers. There is no literature which is actually even addressing it. I don't know, Prof, but I think you are aware, you're a researcher, that in South Africa, we don't have a Speaker of the National Assembly. For sure you are aware. We don't have Speaker of Parliament in South Africa.
Okay,
we only have a Speaker of the National Assembly.
Yes.
Which is Metan Dimudise, and the chairperson of the NCOP. Remember, Parliament consists of the two houses.
The two houses.
It consists of the National Assembly and the NCOP. That is why in SONA you see two people sitting there, and both of them have the same powers. No one can overrule others. So they depend on whispering to each other. I think it was even very clear when Mambaleka was the speaker and Memton, because they were two stronger personalities, and it will depend. Even Honorable Malema will pick the weakest, for sure you have observed, because we don't have that.
Okay.
The Constitution of South Africa don't have that. And we've been saying, let's amend it. And because people don't necessarily, research those kind of things, for them, Parliament is like a joke area where you watch a verbal match between opposition and what. So it caused a crisis. The crisis, you remember at one stage, recently, is it ATM? Not ATM, I just forgot the party, which wanted to pass a motion of no confidence to the president.
It was the ATM.
So they went to court, and they wanted to use the ballot, the secret ballot.
Yeah.
So they went to court. I think it's EFF. Yes, it went to court, and then in the court they realized that long time ago there was a judge called Tloya Mama who took a decision that then the speaker can determine whether we should vote with a secret ballot or not. And because we don't check this kind of things, maybe it was the judiciary is independent, they left it until when this crisis came, when EFF went to court, then the parliament had to stand with the EFF so that the powers can be transferred back to the Speaker of the National Assembly, so that the Speaker can determine in terms of the rules. And remember the constitutional crisis there. EFF cited Parliament. And then they said, no, but there's no Speaker of Parliament. if you're going to cite Parliament, then you must cite also the NCOP. So it can be, because this one is the Speaker of the National Assembly.
Yeah.
So I can go on and on to show you. The other issue is the budget issue. Remember, there's executive and the legislature. But determine the budget of Parliament, of the legislature, is the Minister of Finance. But in terms of the rules, is the budget committee that determine the what goes where. And the Speaker or legislature is not part of that budget, because that's the executive, your cabinet lkhotla, your exco lkhotla, your budget lkhotla. So as a result, who must determine the budget of the Parliament legislature? So it's a gray area, because at one stage we had to call the president and the minister to come and explain this dilemma. But then there is that question that no, there are three spheres of government: the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. And the legislature can't tell the executive can't tell the legislature. So those are gray areas, which I think I'm more interested maybe in assisting, and maybe looking at what you have presented. I might want to have your number, Prof, so that you can assist. But look at it also and see how we can assist our county.
Let me respond.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Thanks, dear. Dr. Rakolote, let me respond.
Yeah, you can respond. Then from there, I'll bring other questions. You can respond, Prof.
There are three already. There are three people. So let's take in that fashion. And let me start with Mepoli. Mepoli, I think you and I can have a conversation, COSID. And I'm trying to make a disclaimer. Ne? When Ntate Baloyi, you probably know him, was in charge of the research unit of Parliament, he, and when I say he, I mean the entire department that reported to Mebalega commissioned us to come and train your democracy offices practitioners. These are people who are mandated. They started in the Northwest Northern Cape, Limpopo. There were about 3 provinces, I think Gauteng as well, as a pilot project. So they invited us, and I became the foot soldier to train those personnel. And how democracy offices work is that, as you know, each time a minister visits a province or a municipality, the minister must be briefed about the realities of the place, so that the minister is not lost in terms of interacting and engaging community members. So let me say, Dr. Rakolote, you will have the slides. My email is on the first slide. I think my cell number as well. Okay. I'm gonna give Mepoli a chance to engage me, because I'm afraid if I were to answer her, I will reveal certain things that I'm not supposed to reveal at this point. But please, Mepoli, take note. I have interacted with Parliament, especially your democracy offices, because remember, they reported to Parliament and then in turn to Palagambete, but they would then go to their offices. And a Gibona now that are being used to interact with all stakeholders in relation to amending Section 25 of the Constitution. But I think, for the sake of time, let's have a conversation around that. And in that way, I think I will be able to contribute meaningfully. But your question is also linked to sub-question 2 of Ntate Tsedu. How do we become
agents in a space where new knowledge must be created. Now let's understand one thing. When you enter the space of research, you enter into an intellectual, by default or by extension, academic space. So a person like Risenga Maluleke, our chief statistician, may very well serve as an example that each time he speaks, those who are not educated are likely to ignore him. Why? Because of the complex language that he uses, because of the scientific nature of his work. So we then move to understand one thing, that intellectuals and academics, such is the case in this entire platform, are people who will understand each other because one, they use academic language, they always structure their thoughts, they engage each other in a very complicated and complex way. Put this differently, if it wasn't for not only my experience in research, but the numerous research books that I have in this office, I would not have the ability to talk to you as an audience of like-minded persons. Break it down further. And this is what Untitled said was raising. How do we create space for students to come up with new knowledge? I always say to my masters and PhDs, before you complete your studies, we can either publish before you finish or publish at the end. Why? So that your thoughts, your arguments are exposed to other like-minded scholars. Remember, a community of scholars, the minute we appreciate a new way of solving problems, that simply signifies that there is consensus amongst us. Or this knowledge is acceptable. This knowledge is groundbreaking. That's the phrase we use. So what does this mean? It means manuscripts will be submitted to journals, accredited journals, where they will be blind peer reviewed. So if 3 reviewers review one manuscript, they represent the entire academic community. And the chances of that manuscript or article being accepted, it's greater. Folks, those who are studying public administration, don't sleep tonight without knowing how many journals in your discipline are available at your disposal. Before you submit your research proposal, do not submit without knowing who are the key, underline, key voices in your proposed area of study. Folks, if I can ask you how many governors, what is it, the bank now? The Reserve Bank we've had since 1994. You need to know that list. You need to know that list. A researcher must know. I always tell my students, if you're still enjoying 8 hours of sleep every day, you have a problem. It's healthy, don't take that away. If you have not started to dream about your research protocol, you have a problem. If you haven't woken up one night and you were dreaming about your work, and suddenly a light moment captured you, and you had to wake up and write notes down, you have a problem. Remember what I said? A researcher must have a diary. A researcher must have a research journal. That's where you write your notes. That's where you're going to write the notes that will fill in when you do your observation. But somehow, ideas come to connect the dots. You must write down those ideas. But to be more direct, any new knowledge must be subjected to academic scrutiny. That's why we have journals. Public admin students and any other discipline present here, get to know your journals. Get to know your research databases, right? You have EBSCO, you have Emerald, you have all other databases that your subject librarian will tell you. This university has subscribed to the following a database, INET Bridge, and others. So when you want an article that needs you to pay for it, you don't have to pay for it if you're a student. Go to the subject librarian, get access. So long as they are subscribed to that database, you will get access. And like I said, 80% get sources, arrange your sources, read your sources, 20%. So the whole notion of new knowledge, there's always room. That's why we have conferences, folks. Conferences are platforms where new knowledge is exposed, discussed, interrogated thoroughly. That's why students, when they're told, prepare a conference paper, they are hesitant because they are afraid professors are going to interrogate them. But that's scholarship. Scholarship, it's about being brave to propose your ideas and not being afraid. In the end, you are likely to have your ideas accepted. I mean, in the discipline of public administration, some of us were fortunate enough. In my first year, I was taught by the so-called father of public administration in this country, J.J. Nklute. 1994, Professor Mkhoro, Professor Ivan Shwela, Professor Fanny Klute, and others converged in Magaliesberg, Mount Grace Hotel, and they came up with a new concept, new public management. We should learn from such experiments that there's always room for new knowledge, as long as if you can attract the right audience and do things correctly and be exposed to scrutiny and allow your work to withstand scrutiny. That is it partly answers the question of poor manuscripts. I would invite you, and perhaps through Untitled Rakolote, to make at least 2 of my publications that dealt with the issue of measuring the level of preparedness for postgraduate students in research-based qualifications. I did a study at UNISA, I did a study here. And one of the things that caught my attention is that students don't know the popular theoretical frameworks in that discipline. And that contributes to poor management. And of course, there's other problems that would come. The issue of biography with a specific focus on, again, scrutinizing facts will always be important. You know, I was taught when I was doing my PhD that avoid using, for lack of a better word, secondary sources. According to Hanyane in Rakolote, avoid that. Go to Hanyane, don't go to Rakolote. How do you know that Rakolote misrepresented Hanyane? Always go to the primary source so that you avoid issues that says, Sedu said, and only to realize that Sedu's facts were not tested. So the veracity of facts misrepresents science, regardless of discipline. So it's the behavior of researchers that comes to the fore. Okay. Data gathering, how do we modernize techniques? Look, it's always advisable that you don't stick to popular research strategies. I've made reference to phenomenology, and I hope those who are in public administration wrote down the name of my colleague. It's Dr. S.X. Thani, Thini. He wrote a thesis about why is it that students of public administration are shying away from using phenomenology as a research strategy. As a discipline, we need to open ourselves to alternative strategies in research. It's okay to go and borrow from other disciplines and apply it in your own discipline. Okay. The last question that Rakolote had to do with a triangle. So let's go back quickly. We said at the top, we need to put what? Problem statement. Okay. And I've explained what problem statement entails. The minute it has 2 pages or more, there's something wrong. Stop it. A problem statement must be 2-3 paragraphs at most, but one broad paragraph does the trick. And the problem statement must have a central research question. What is it exactly that you are studying? So it must be crisp, it must be focused. The bottom right, it's your research aims / objectives, as well as questions. Okay? They are there. Look at the past manuscripts. How, again, let's be careful. From one university to the other, the template is not the same. So take note of that. But generally, the problem statement is followed by research aims and objectives. Then you turn those aims and objectives into research questions. Okay? So there's consistency. Followed by methodology. So these 3 pillars must talk to one another. You can't have a social problem which in your methodology you claim is going to be addressed by a quantitative method only, and yet it's a social problem. Those 2 don't mix. You can have a social problem that is likely to accommodate quantitative methodology, but at the same time, we need to understand this social problem from the basis of meaning and interpretation. So mixed method is a safer route to have. Rakolote, I hope I've answered all 3 questions.
Thank you, Prof. Let me pose other questions from the chat, and I'm sure this will be the last questions. Before I can go to this chat, please take note that
better not, because of time, Dr. Rakolote, I may have to leave you.
Okay.
So let me be open. Look, the slides, here it is. There's my office number, there's my email.
Okay, I'll also share the slides with all those who have left their emails here.
Yeah.
And without your permission and without a permission of MEC Polibushielo, I've given you the number of MEC Polibushielo and I've given her your number.
Okay.
Then I'll keep in touch. And let's not go to the questions like you said.
Yeah.
Because of time.
I will respond. Look, people can send questions directly to my email. I will respond to that.
Okay. But before we close, thank you so much, Prof, and thanks so much for availing yourself every time from when we requested to present. You honor our invite, Prof. We are so humbled.
Thank you so much.
I want to challenge all participants in this group today. As part of practicing that what we have learned today, all of us who are in this session, we are required to do a literature review on ethics in public service. Whatever we have learned today, let's go and do a short literature review on ethics in public service.
Yeah.
Because on the 11th of March this year at 6 o'clock, we're going to have a webinar that will focus on the topic, advancing honesty, ethics, and integrity in the public service. What are the required recipes? So please, colleagues, go and just read the literature around ethics in public service so that when we have that webinar on the 11th of March, we can all contribute. Today, we were taught on how to do a research. Literature review is part of research. So let's go and engage literature around ethics in public service. On the 11th of March, we'll have a session on advancing honesty, ethics, and integrity in the public service. We will also request Prof. Hanyane to lead us. I'm sure, I'm sorry to hijack you. We'll request Prof. Hanyane to lead us in that discussion on ethics in public sector.
Yeah.
In the recent SONA, the president spoke about professionalizing the public sector. So we are focusing on that to say, how can we professionalize a public sector? We must advance ethics and integrity in the public service. So we are moving in that direction. Thank you so much, colleagues, for participating. And we'll look forward to see you on the 11th of March. We'll publicize the event, share the login details, and please invite other colleagues to come and participate. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks,
Rakolote.
Thank